Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Pre-med and medical students alike are encouraged to tune in each week for tips on how to become a strong med school candidate, gain acceptance into the school of your dreams, and succeed on your journey toward residency and becoming a doctor.
Hi, everybody. We have Dr. Renee Volny Darko here, and I'm super excited to have her as a guest, and I'll just let her tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi, Erkeda. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate you reaching out to me. My name is Dr. Renee Volny Darko, and I'm an OB-GYN. I went to medical school it's over 16 years ago. I can't even believe it's been that long, but finally graduated from Kansas City University of Medicine and Biosciences, College of Osteopathic Medicine, did my residency at Robert Wood Johnson in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And after that, I actually went on to do a fellowship in health policy leadership at the Morehouse School of Medicine under Dr. David Satcher. Since then, I've just been, kind of practicing. I've done a little bit of academia as well. I have gone into some entrepreneurial ventures, which I'm sure we'll get into. And my passion really is around helping pre-meds, particularly underrepresented minority pre-meds, get into medical school. I'm just excited to be able to talk with your audience today.
Well, we're definitely excited to have you and chat about all those exciting things. Before we start, I just want to take it back to when you were in medical school and just kind of reflect on what drove you to choose OB-GYN as your specialty.
That's a really great question. It's funny because I always tell people I actually did not want to do OB. Like that was the last thing on my list of things to do. I remember I would have a saying, I'll do psychiatry before I do OB. And not that anything is wrong with psychiatry, right? But
Yes.
OB was the last thing that I wanted to do. And I wanted to go into pediatrics actually. And I got to my pediatric rotation in my third year and I hated it. I just did not enjoy it at all. I love the kids. The parents didn't really bother me. That's what people usually say, oh, the parents. But it wasn't so much the parents. It was the medicine of pediatrics that I just didn't enjoy. I wasn't really good at it. And so once I finished that particular rotation, I didn't quite know what I was going to do because I was like, well, that was the one thing that I really liked. And there hadn't really been anything else that I enjoyed. But at that point, I had not actually done my OB-GYN rotation. I had convinced myself that I was not going to like it. And OB was actually the last rotation that I had in my third year, which
Wow.
many of you know, if you're a medical school, you know that you probably should have an idea where you're going to be applying for residency, at least starting that application around that time. And I, at that point, had no specialty that interested me. And once I delivered my first baby, I just said, oh my God, this is so great. Then we went into the operating room and I was like, this is so great. And we were doing procedures in the office. I'm like, this is so great. And I don't know. I had to, at some point, really come to terms with myself that OB-GYN was definitely the thing that I enjoyed the most, even though it was the thing I had convinced myself that I didn't.
That's a really great subject that you bring up because a lot of students do go into school just really thinking that they're going to be like, oh, I know I've wanted to be a neurologist my whole life or an emergency doctor or a surgeon. And then when you get to it, you're like, this looked better on paper, but it's not something I want to do for 30 years. So It's great to go into your third year with an open mind for each rotation. Every rotation is only 4 weeks. So for tenure that specialty and immerse yourself in it. And if you love it, great. You might continue it. If not, you did 4 weeks of it and you were awesome. And being open, like you said, you got to pediatrics and you're like, this isn't for me. And not pushing yourself into that box that you had envisioned yourself to be, and being open to learning other things is a great thing.
Exactly. I mean, I think that you hit on a very important point. Oftentimes pre-meds will go in and they think many of them think that you actually have to choose what you want to be before you ever apply to medical school. And that is such a fallacy. You don't actually have to know, you don't even have to have an idea of what you want to be in terms of specialty when you're pre-med. So yes, going in with an open mind and really just embracing everything as you go through your rotations is going to be very, very important.
Absolutely. Now, on another topic, you provide a lot of resources and coaching in terms of how to be a stellar medical school applicant. What are the top 3 things that you would recommend that anyone do that's applying to medical school now?
Well, I mean, now we're talking about a pandemic. We are in the time of COVID.
2020.
2020. And what hindsight that will be. So now is definitely a much more challenging time, I think, for pre-meds. There's a lot of uncertainty. But what I would say as far as top 3, number 1 is actually be flexible. You really have to go in with kind of an understanding that the process is not necessarily going to look the same, and you have to be flexible, right? So if that means that deadlines get changed, deadlines might get moved up, requirements aren't necessarily the same, what you thought might be okay to take in person might now be something that you have to take remotely in terms of classes, that you have to be flexible. And I know that pre-meds, doctors, we tend to be very type A, like it has to go this way or else it cannot happen. But that is not how life works. And obviously we've learned that. And that's not actually how medicine works. So being flexible is going to be extremely, extremely important. That said, being flexible is important, but the other thing that is going to be important, so my second point is going to be understanding that just because things are flexible doesn't mean that they are lax, right? So I know that COVID definitely has changed things for people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the recommendations or the criteria, I should say, are going to be so relaxed that anything goes. It's not an anything goes kind of thing. I know it feels like we're in the zombie apocalypse and anything might go, but at the same time, you really, really still have to keep up with your academic acumen. You have to continue to study for the MCAT. There were a lot of pre-meds who were like, well, they should get rid of the MCAT. I mean, whether they should or should not is not really up to us. That really is up to the medical colleges, and you can't be too relaxed. So that's going to be my second point, is that, you still want to be on point. It's still important for you to do as best as you possibly can, even though you're being flexible. And then thirdly, what I would say is continue the things that you're already doing in terms of making sure that you're getting the help that you're supposed to get, trying to access resources, right? So all is not necessarily lost because of COVID, okay? There's still tons and tons of resources out there. So don't feel like, well, I was supposed to go to this conference and it got canceled, or I was supposed to do this class, or I was supposed to do whatever it is that you were supposed to do to enhance yourself as a pre-med applicant. Continue to find ways to be able to do those things, even though they are not panning out the way that you thought that they were going to pan out. So continue to build yourself up basically as a candidate. Medical schools are going to appreciate that you took the initiative that maybe other people are not necessarily taking. So get creative with some of the things that you're doing. If you can't go to the conference, maybe look for a virtual conference and participate in that and be very, very active in those things. If people are offering webinars, be very present and participate in those events. So those would be the 3 pieces of advice that I would give, especially in this time.
I love those pieces of advice because they're such great pearls. Because one of my questions, you already kind of covered it, was what can someone do if they can't necessarily volunteer like they used to do, or do things to kind of make their application stand out? But like you mentioned, there are a lot of other things we can do creatively
Right.
And the admissions committees are probably taking into account that, okay, the interest group may not be as active in the things that they were trying to do, but this person used what was going on this year to make a difference or to impact and change.
Exactly. And that's important for pre-meds to understand. The pandemic is not happening in a bubble. The medical schools, all the people who are sitting on admissions committees, they are going through the pandemic as well. And so they understand that there are going to be some limitations with everything that used to be available or being somewhat limited in their availability. So it's just really important for pre-meds to understand that.
Excellent advice. Do you have any idea of the types of changes that will come during this application process in terms of virtual interviews and other requirements?
Yeah, I mean, that really is something that many of myself and my colleagues, we've been kind of talking about and trying to prepare students for. In particular, the virtual interview, like you mentioned, I think that's going to be something that is going to be very new for a lot of the medical schools. Some medical schools were doing virtual interviews already, but there were many medical schools who were not necessarily going down that path pre-COVID. And so with the virtual interviews, I think, again, we have to be very, very mindful that just because things are not the way that they used to be doesn't mean that everything is completely different. So with medical interviews, I encourage students to, one, learn how to appear on the screen. Okay, that's going to be extremely important. You don't want to be a talking head. You want to be able to kind of show a little bit of shoulder. You want to be able to appear professional. So that's going to be very important. Two, take the interview as if it is in person. And that's going to be so very important for students to understand that having your cat kind of roam around in the background is really not going to be something that is going to be looked upon as like, oh, okay, well, they're just home, right? They want you to prepare for this interview as best as you possibly can. Understanding that, yes, there are going to be some circumstances where you're not necessarily able to do everything that you possibly can to, let's say, minimize noise reduction and things like that. But the things that you can control, you should certainly be able to do that. Other changes, again, I kind of mentioned before, whether or not dates are going to be pushed up, pushed back. That might be something that students really have to keep on top of, because if the application cycle is changing constantly because of COVID, right? There's like the first wave and then everything kind of plateaued. And then it's like, okay, well, here are the dates. If there's another wave, we don't know how that's going to impact the application process. So you really have to be very diligent about keeping yourself abreast of the changes that will come with not just the application services, ACOMAS and AAMC and AMCAS, but keeping abreast of the different schools that might actually have some changes in their own deadlines. Because again, living in different states may have different levels of infection. And so if things are closed down, if airports close down, things like that, that could really, really impact what the schools are able to do and offer to students in terms of the application process.
That makes sense. So it sounds like you're saying make sure that you maintain professionalism and pretend like you're having the interview, even if it's online and virtual, like you were actually in person. So dress appropriately, try to keep the area clean and keep noise down and controlled, but also be flexible in terms of the schools and their workflows and processes, because it may change week to week. So you may be able to travel, you may not, but try to stay on top of the information.
Right. Exactly.
That sounds great. On another note, you and your husband, who is a host of a very popular podcast, Docs Outside the Box, are very open about obtaining financial freedom. What is the top thing that you would advise newly accepted medical students to do to set them up for success financially?
Ooh, that's a really good question, because, majority of medical students are going to incur some sort of student loan debt. And that's a very real thing. There are lots of implications to getting school debt. It's really about the mindset, I would say. If you have a mindset of wanting to be able to live the lifestyle that you want without having to be obligated to a certain degree of work, if you will, if that makes sense, right? So, what do I mean by that? I mean, if you live within your means, and that's important because a lot of people don't even understand what that actually means, right? Like we say it, but when you ask somebody, well, what does that really mean to live within your means? Well, it means that you are going to live well below, you're going to spend well below what you are bringing in. If you start to practice that as a medical student, then you will most likely take that into your residency years as well as your attending years. So oftentimes people think, well, I don't want to have to deprive myself. I don't want to have to starve. And that doesn't necessarily mean starve. It means what do you need versus what do you want? And you don't have to deprive yourself of what you want all the time, but you don't also have to live on only what you want. You really should be thinking about the things that you need. Because when you do that, when you live below your means, right, or within your means, then what starts to happen is you start to develop certain habits with saving, potentially investing even, and you start to realize that you can live without a lot of things that you thought maybe were things that you really, really wanted, but you start to be able to see how far this lifestyle can take you. So the money is just really a tool. It's not something to just, oh, well, let's just accumulate a lot of money. It really is just a tool to be able to do the things that you actually truly want to do later on in life. So I'll give you an example for myself and my husband. One of the things that we did when we ended up paying off $662,000 worth of student loan debt in 3 years. And that's obviously a lot of money, but we worked very, very hard to do that. We were doing permanent positions as well as locums assignments to be able to do that. But what we figured out was that we really like to travel and we like the freedom of just being able to stay at home or, for example, with me and my children, I like to stay home with my children. I'm able to do that because I haven't tied myself financially to a lifestyle that will not allow me to do that.
That makes total sense. It's like investing in yourself and investing in your future.
Right.
Like you've invested a lot of time. So of course you may not get everything you want, but like you said, don't deprive yourself, but you also have these responsibilities so that you can live for your future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that insight. And while we're speaking about savings and things like that, I just wanted to do a plug for our podcast. Everyone who is listening, we have $5 off any kind of thing on medschoolcoach.com. If you look at merch.medschoolcoach.com and you put in a promo code podcast5, you'll get $5 off any kind of thing so you can use it and show everybody that you're listening to our podcast. So now that I've done that gentle and not so gentle plug, any final words of wisdom for the students that are listening in their various parts of their journey in medical school?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that I really try to push to pre-meds, medical students, pretty much anyone who is going through this academic journey is that you have to understand what your mindset is. So there's a spectrum called the growth mindset, and there's a fixed mindset as well as a growth mindset. And what a fixed mindset is, fixed mindset basically says that you are as intelligent as you're ever going to be. And that's it. That intelligence is fixed. And there's, you're either smart and you got it or you're not. Whereas a growth mindset says that no, that you can actually grow into your intelligence. That intelligence is not fixed, that it really can be potentially endless if you put the effort into it. And very, briefly, I'll tell a quick study that happened. And I think Carol Dweck is out in Stanford, but she came up with the whole growth versus fixed mindset. And they did a study on pre-med students, and they were taking chemistry. And so I guess they had evaluated to see what kind of mindset each of these students had. And so they determined that those students who had fixed mindsets and did not do well on their first exams continued not to do well. Whereas those who had growth mindset actually were able to redeem themselves and actually get a good grade. So when we say, oh, Brian is just smart, we should really stop saying that. Or you have to be really smart to get a 520 on the MCAT. We really should stop saying that, because people who do get good grades, people who do get good scores on the MCAT, they put in a lot of effort. It's not effortless. So we have to stop saying that, because then it also gives us a pass to think, well, if I'm not that smart, then it's okay because I won't hit that 520 anyway. But you can. And so I would say, go into everything that you do with a growth mindset and understand that there's a power in the word yet. And to say, I don't understand that is much different than I don't understand that yet. That's what I would definitely leave with your audience, is just be in the growth mindset.
That's amazing advice. And I think that people can use that both inside and outside of medicine in life. Yeah. So always be willing to grow and adapt and learn and change for the improvement of your strategies in your life. Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you coming and joining us today.
Thank you.
If you ever want to come back, let us know. I'm sure you could give us advice for days.
I could.
And if anyone wants to reach out to Dr. Darko, feel free to look her up. We'll probably add some links to her social media on the platform.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erkeda, for inviting me. This was really fun.
Thanks. Bye.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward med school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.